So with the summer season finally coming to an end, of which we got a variety of shows, none of which that I watched, one series in particular stood out the most in the anime community, that being Re:Zero. With a general overall praise of the series, with some people even reviewing the show before it even finished, it almost seems like there's nothing wrong with it, or in any case, very little. I reluctantly decided to watch Re:Zero airing, and I think it's fair to say that it has its ups and downs. Even though the genre of being thrown into a random fantasy world has been done to death, Re:Zero takes the setting and uses a little spin with its time travel dynamic. But is it enough to actually make the show worth watching? Today on the agenda, there are problems with Re:Zero starting life in another world. Spoilers ahead. The time travel genre surprisingly hasn't been used all too often in anime. The shows that will most likely come to your mind are these, and we all know how Erased went. So with the addition of Re:Zero to the list, how does the series hold up? Well, I'll start with the good aspects just to ease people in. I think the show actually has quite a good start. Re:Zero doesn't begin like most cliched generic fantasy shows, instead is self-aware of the fact. Subaru tries to indulge into a fantasy world when he's literally transported out of thin air. He thinks about all the fun times he's going to have and is self-aware about the absurdity of it all. It's refreshing to see a main character who isn't overpowered or a badass, but instead is weak and powerless compared to literally everyone in the cast. Subaru's only catch is that he'll reset every time he dies. Initially, he takes advantage of the resets accordingly, avoiding danger, solving problems, and furthering his relationship with others. For the most part, it was a pretty good start to the series, and pair this with Emilia being the foundation of support for Subaru's actions, it created a small yet genuine bond between them. Subaru had a conscious goal that he was striving for in the early episodes, and that's made abundantly clear through his actions, whether it's saving Emilia or just trying to please her. Though it isn't just Emilia, he tries to create bonds with all the people in the mansion, and it's actually devastating when it resets because you lose that emotional investment. It's as if the connection never happened, and losing something even as small as a promise can be crushing. The ending of episode 4 perfectly encapsulates this, with Subaru making a promise with Emilia and deepening their bond together, only to find out that he died in his sleep. It's a shocking moment due to how abruptly it happens, and we can see the regret on Subaru's face. This of course plays into a major recurring theme of Re:Zero being trapped in a never-ending cycle of despair and losing all hope that was left. This was definitely the highlight of the series, seeing Subaru's mental state slowly degrade over time, failing to save Emilia over and over again until he lost all sense of humanity. Though it's not to say that this idea is unique in any way, since it has been done before, but Re:Zero still does an exceptional job portraying it. With episode 15 being the pinnacle of the series, it shows us how far Subaru's mental state has fallen due to his suffering. His desperate attempts in trying to save the people he deeply cares about, only for it to be in vain, is something I and many others can empathize with. The episode then proceeds to build up tension, leading towards a shocking climax, by presenting the worst possible outcome, which involves Rem playing the worst game of Twister I've ever seen. And just when you think it's over, the final shot is the most haunting experience of all, with Subaru holding Rem in his arms, completely shattered, begging to be put out of his misery, only then to suddenly get decapitated. An ominous track starts playing and the credits roll. Damn, that was a good episode. It's no wonder why people enjoy Re:Zero, because it's episodes like these that solidify the series. Though even then, it's not the visuals that make the most impactful moments, it's the soundtrack. Whether it's a confession or an execution, the subtle use of its soundtrack is powerful, especially the ghostly moan that signals the event of something sinister.
もう遅すぎたんだよ。
Now, the points I've brought up about the series aren't half-truths just so I have an excuse to bash the show. These are aspects about Re:Zero I genuinely think are good. However, towards the midpoint and latter half of the show, it significantly drops in quality and at times even hard to watch. Let's take Subaru, aka Worst Car, since I think whether or not you liked his character, you can agree in how he acts. Subaru is a narcissist, and I'm not just talking about the latter half of the show, it was present from the very beginning. Subaru isn't a character you're meant to be rooting for, not because he's an anti-hero, but because he has a despicable personality. He has a fallacy in which he thinks he is the only person that could solve all the problems, even though other characters are much more capable. Take Amelia for example. Subaru essentially forces his will on her by ignoring her wishes time after time and does what he thinks is best for her. He treats her as a powerless damsel in distress when it's shown many times that Amelia is more than able to take care of herself. In fact, it's because of Subaru's careless actions that it causes trouble and burdens Amelia during the election process. He then states that everything he did was for her sake, but in reality treats Amelia like she can't do anything without his help. This kind of characterization really boils my blood, because for a show so heavily focused on developing its characters, you'd think that it would make the scenes believable, but instead it's sad and just plain aggravating.
私ね、期待してたの。ひょっとしたらスバルは私を、スバルだけは私を特別扱いしないんじゃないかって。
ReZero is very much a point of view story, and while there's nothing inherently wrong with this, it becomes evident that Subaru only acts stupidly when the story demands it. While some of his behavior can be accounted for from his traumatic experiences, there's a fine line between Subaru acting irrationally since it was a logical progression of his character, and Subaru acting stupidly to create forced tension when there isn't any. ReZero does this a lot. Often when there's a calm and logical solution to a problem, all Subaru needs to do is explain himself clearly and carefully. He of course doesn't do this and opts to yell in the most obnoxious manner, making him seem desperate and asshole-ish. In episode 12 and 13, he interferes with the royal election unnecessarily and it makes for some of the most cringe-worthy moments in the entire show. He then ends up outbursting and creates forced drama between Amelia when it all could have been avoided. Even if the initial intent was to make him seem like a douchebag, it doesn't excuse the fact that it was convenient for Subaru's character to act stupidly for the sake of the narrative. I say this because it's not like Subaru wasn't capable of making the logical decision, since in episode 19 he does exactly that, by negotiating with Crush to save Amelia. It's like the show knows what the logical decision is, but elects to do the wrong one for the conflict of interest. While we're on the topic of Subaru's character, at times, I think the show takes Subaru's suffering a little too far. While yes, it is devastating to see him break down, it becomes too repetitive over time and feels like the show is torturing Subaru for the sake of his despair. It feels like this in a sense. Along the way, ReZero loses the dramatic impact that gripped us to begin with. Subaru dying and resetting over and over again becomes repetitive fast. If you think about how ReZero is structured, every episode and every arc is based off how Subaru reacts. In the 25 episodes the series has, almost nothing actually gets accomplished besides the election and some character bonds. Subaru is faced with a problem, and while yes, it can be endearing to see him break through and find a solution, over the course of the show, you eventually know that Subaru will overcome that problem without any real consequences. With this line of thinking, all the conflicts in ReZero are ultimately rendered pointless and inconsequential, since you know for a fact that everything will be resolved with no issues. I don't need to point out how this is a big problem because God forbid characters stay dead and Subaru has to live with his decisions. But no, everything turns out just fine. Towards the end of the series, ReZero became generic and easily predictable. With episode 19 came the Battle of the White Whale, or the Moby Dick effect from The Boy and the Beast. Keep in mind that Subaru had at least died 4 other times from trying to save Amelia, so when episode 18 came along and Ren confessed her love for Subaru, do you honestly think that he would reset during the whale arc? Of course not. Anyone with half a brain would know that he would finally overcome this obstacle without dying. But the worst part isn't ReZero becoming predictable, it's knowing that Subaru would defeat the white whale by having it fleshed out to 3 episodes, as if you wanted a drawn out battle with no sense of danger in it. Why the whale got its own episode, I'll never understand, since the arc didn't deepen Subaru's struggle and at best only reinforced ideas from episode 18. It was boring, cliché, and really not much to it. While you could argue that this is development for Subaru's character, facing his enemies in a much more hopeful outlook and building trust in others, it almost feels cheap having him die and losing all that progress due to a stupid plot twist. I am of course referencing the end of episode 23, where Betelgeuse so conveniently took control of Subaru's body. What was the point of this? I mean, sure, it is shocking, but the twist itself is utterly stupid. It does nothing except prolong events. It wasn't going to reset before the whale, otherwise everyone would have collectively had to facepalm, but it also didn't go back far enough to have any impact since it's basically solved the next episode. Finally, we have the ending, which really wasn't all that bad to be honest, but still not great. Subaru at last gets to properly talk and confess to Amelia. The scene is sweet and had a genuine connection. Even though Amelia didn't give him a proper response, it's heavily inferred what her answer is. This definitely would have solidified her as best girl, but too bad she doesn't appear in the show enough to be considered a main character, so you have Rem instead. Much better. This is a major aspect ReZero is lacking, its characters. Besides Subaru and Rem, none of the characters are fleshed out and all can be boiled down to simple quirks. Amelia is a generic love interest who's kind and gentle, Felt is the stubborn feisty girl, Crush is a strong calculated leader, and Betelgeuse is just an over-the-top crazy villain. In a series containing time travel elements, engaging the audience requires the believability of characters, and Subaru loses his sense of logic in favor of creating conflict. And that's bad writing. Aside from Subaru's breakdown and Rem as a character, ReZero has a lot of faults. Its overuse of death becomes repetitive, it loses dramatic impact by turning the show into another generic fantasy, and has characters make stupid decisions for the sake of the narrative. By the end, ReZero seems to have lost interest in telling a well thought out character conflict, and in the end just uses its gimmicks to make people care. At best, ReZero is slightly above average, and at worst, it's mediocre. Hopefully you can understand all the arguments I made, and if you can't, be sure to tell me how I have a wrong opinion. Those comments are always the best. Anyway, if there's anything you should take away from this video, it's never buy a Subaru. Get a Prius instead.